The ink was still wet. Marcus stared at the entry dated March 15, 2020, tomorrow's date, written in his own unmistakable handwriting. The words crawled across the yellowed page like spiders fleeing light. Day 847. The fog brought them back. Sarah's voice echoes from the rocks again. I won't make the same mistake twice. The light must never go out. Never again. His hands trembled as he held the Lighthouse logbook, the leather binding cold against his palms, despite the crackling fire in the keeper's quarters. Outside, March wind howled through the Portland Head light station, rattling windows that had weathered 2 centuries of Atlantic storms. But it wasn't the wind that made his blood run cold. It was the impossible entry written in his own hand describing events that hadn't happened yet. The lighthouse beam swept across Casco Bay in its eternal rhythm, casting shadows that danced like phantoms across the cramped room. Marcus had been the keeper here for 3 years, maintaining meticulous records as his predecessors had done since 1791. Every entry documented weather conditions, ship sightings, maintenance tasks. Nothing more. Nothing like this. His eyes darted to the previous entries. All normal, all in his handwriting, all dated correctly. March 13th noted heavy fog and a delayed supply boat. March 14th, today, recorded routine lamp maintenance and 2 fishing vessels passing safely. Then came tomorrow's impossible entry, as real as his own reflection in the window. Welcome back to the channel, Night Watchers. Whether you're tuning in from a cozy bedroom or working the graveyard shift, tonight's story will make you question what's real and what's waiting in the fog. Before we dive into this true account from a lighthouse keeper in Maine, smash that like button if you're brave enough for what's coming, and don't forget to subscribe for more real horror stories. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, but maybe check your locks first. Marcus Chen had never intended to become a lighthouse keeper. 6 months ago, he'd been debugging software in a Seattle high-rise, his biggest worry being whether his code would crash the quarterly reports. Then his grandfather died, leaving him the keeper's position at Portland Head Light, a job that had been in his family for 4 generations. The transition from tech worker to lighthouse keeper felt like stepping backward through time. Instead of server farms and fiber optic cables, Marcus now maintained a 200-year-old lighthouse with brass fittings that required daily polishing and a Fresnel lens system that demanded constant attention. The Coast Guard had automated most lighthouses decades ago, but Portland Head remained manually operated due to its historical significance and the treacherous nature of the local waters. His living quarters occupied the small brick building adjacent to the lighthouse tower. The rooms were spartanly furnished, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, a sitting area with built-in bookshelves, and a bedroom barely large enough for a single bed. The walls were thick stone that kept the rooms cool in summer and required hefty fires in winter. It was March 2020, and Maine still gripped the coast with winter's dying breath. The isolation hadn't bothered him initially. After years of open-plan offices and constant connectivity, the solitude felt therapeutic. Ships passed daily through the bay, fishing boats, pleasure craft, and the occasional cargo vessel bound for Portland's harbor. Coast Guard cutters made regular patrols, their crews offering friendly waves as they passed. During tourist season, visitors climbed the lighthouse for panoramic views of the Atlantic, though COVID-19 restrictions had recently closed the site to public access. Marcus had embraced the routine morning checks of the lighthouse equipment, afternoon maintenance tasks, evening preparation for the night watch. The beacon operated automatically, but regulations required a keeper on site to monitor weather conditions and assist vessels in distress. He'd grown to love the rhythm of it all, the predictable rotation of the light, the sound of waves against the rocky shore, the sight of sunrise, painting the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The logbook had become his constant companion. The leather-bound volume was thick with decades of entries from previous keepers, their handwriting telling stories of storms weathered and lives saved. Marcus read their accounts during quiet evenings, learning about the heroic rescue of the merchant vessel Catherine Marie in 1978, or the tragic loss of 3 fishermen during the blizzard of 1993. The book was a chronicle of human drama played out against the eternal backdrop of sea and sky. His own entries had settled into a comfortable pattern of meteorological observations and routine notes. Until tonight. Until the impossible entry that shouldn't exist written in his own handwriting about events that hadn't yet occurred. He'd checked the date 3 times, even consulted his phone to confirm it was indeed March 14th. The entry was there nonetheless, as solid and real as the granite foundation beneath his feet. Something was wrong at Portland Head Light, something that defied explanation. As Marcus stared at the logbook, the lighthouse beam continued its eternal sweep. But for the first time since arriving, he felt truly alone in the darkness. Marcus slammed the logbook shut and paced to the window. The March night pressed against the glass like a living thing, and fog was beginning to roll in from the southeast, unusual for this time of year. He grabbed his weather radio and checked the marine forecast. No mention of fog. The National Weather Service called for clear skies and light winds through tomorrow evening. Yet there it was, a wall of gray advancing across Casco Bay like a slow-moving avalanche. He returned to the logbook, hands shaking as he opened it to tomorrow's entry. The words hadn't changed, day 847. The fog brought them back. Sarah's voice echoes from the rocks again. Day 847 of what he'd been keeping the lighthouse for exactly 1,095 days. 3 years. The math didn't add up. Marcus flipped through previous entries, searching for any mention of someone named Sarah. The pages revealed nothing unusual until he reached an entry from his predecessor, Robert Hawthorne, dated September 15th, 2017, day 12. Fog rolled in without warning again. Heard voices calling from the rocks near Devil's Point. Could swear one sounded like Sarah, but that's impossible. She's been gone 47 years. Must be the isolation playing tricks. Note, check foghorn tomorrow. Seemed delayed tonight. The entry was crossed out with heavy black ink, nearly illegible. Beneath it, in different handwriting, disregard above. Keeper Hawthorne relieved of duty due to mental health concerns. Deputy Chief Morrison, USCG. Marcus's throat went dry. He'd never been told why his predecessor left. The Coast Guard had simply informed him that the position was available due to early retirement. He flipped forward through Hawthorne's entries, all normal routine observations until they stopped abruptly on September 16th, 2017. A sound from outside made him look up. Through the window, he could see the fog had reached the lighthouse, turning the beam into a diffused glow that barely penetrated 10 feet into the gray wall. The foghorn should have activated automatically by now, triggered by the visibility sensors. But the night remained eerily quiet except for the distant crash of waves against the rocks. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and rain jacket. He needed to check the foghorn manually. Ships could be navigating blind out there. As keeper, their safety was his responsibility. He stepped outside into air so thick he could taste salt and something else. Something organic and wrong, like seaweed left too long in the sun. The fog had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien world. The lighthouse beam, normally visible for 19 miles, faded into gray nothingness just beyond the gallery. Marcus made his way carefully down the narrow path to the fog signal building, his flashlight beam absorbed by the murk like light falling into deep water. The foghorn mechanism looked normal. A powerful electric compressor connected to a horn that could blast warnings at 125 decibels. Marcus checked the connections, tested the visibility sensor. Everything appeared functional. He pressed the manual activation button. Nothing happened. He tried again, holding the button down for a full 10 seconds. The compressor hummed, the system showed green lights across the board, but no sound emerged from the horn. Impossible. He could see the diaphragm moving, could feel vibrations through the metal housing, but the fog swallowed the sound completely. "Hello." The voice came from somewhere in the fog, thin and distant. Female, young. Marcus froze his flashlight beam, dancing uselessly in the gray void. "Hello, is someone there? Please, help me." It was coming from the direction of the rocks, the treacherous outcropping locals called Devil's Point. Ships had been wrecked there for 2 centuries. The rocks lay exposed at low tide, but high tide was approaching, and in this fog. "I'm here," Marcus shouted back. "Stay where you are. Don't move." He grabbed the emergency radio from the fog signal building and tried to raise the Coast Guard. Static answered him. He tried the Marine Emergency Channel, then the Lighthouse service frequency. Nothing but white noise, as if the fog absorbed radio waves as completely as it did sound and light. The voice came again, closer now. "Please hurry, I'm so cold. I can't feel my feet anymore." Marcus ran toward the sound, his flashlight beam carving a narrow tunnel through the fog. The familiar path to Devil's Point had vanished. Rocks and tide pools appeared suddenly in his light, forcing him to navigate carefully to avoid a fall. The fog seemed to move around him with deliberate intent, revealing glimpses of the landscape only to snatch them away again. "Keep talking," he called. "I'm coming. What's your name?" "Sarah," came the reply, so close now he should be able to see her. "Sarah Kellerman. My boat. There was something wrong with the engine, and then the fog came so fast." Marcus swept his flashlight in wide arcs, illuminating patches of seaweed-covered rock and dark tidal pools. No sign of a person. No sign of a boat. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the fog itself was speaking. "Sarah, I can't see you. Can you see my light? Your light?" The voice had changed subtly, taking on a confused quality. "There is no light. There hasn't been light for so long. Why won't you answer? I've been calling and calling." A chill that had nothing to do with the ocean air crawled down Marcus's spine. He looked back toward the lighthouse and gasped. The beam was gone. The tower rose into the fog like a black monolith, dark and silent. The keeper's quarters showed no warm glow of electric light. Even his flashlight seemed dimmer, its beam barely reaching beyond his outstretched hand. Sarah, where are you?" Silence answered him. Not even the sound of waves against rock, though he stood mere feet from the water's edge. The fog pressed against him like a living thing, thick as cotton, cold as grave dirt. His watch read 11:47 p.m., but when he looked again, the digital display showed only blinking lines, as if time itself had become uncertain. Marcus turned and ran blindly back toward where the lighthouse should be, stumbling over rocks and splashing through tidal pools. Behind him, carried on the impossible silence, came the sound of someone crying. A young woman's voice, heartbroken and hopeless, calling out into the endless gray void. "Please don't leave me alone again. Please. I've been waiting so long." Marcus burst through the door of the keeper's quarters, gasping and soaked with fog dampness that seemed to have penetrated his bones. Inside, electric lights blazed normally, the wood stove crackled with warmth, and through the windows he could see the lighthouse beam sweeping steadily across the bay. The fog had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. He checked his watch, 11:52 p.m. 5 minutes. He'd been outside for what felt like hours, but only 5 minutes had passed. His clothes were bone dry despite the certainty that he'd been drenched moments before. Even his flashlight showed a full battery charge, though he was certain it had been dimming in the fog. The logbook lay open on the table where he'd left it, tomorrow's impossible entry still there in his own handwriting. But now there was something else. A new line had appeared beneath the original text. "Sarah found me by the rocks. She remembers now. She remembers everything." The ink was still wet. Marcus grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Deputy Chief Morrison's number. The Coast Guard officer had been his primary contact during the transition to lighthouse keeper. If anyone knew about Sarah Kellerman and what had happened to Keeper Hawthorne, it would be Morrison. The call went straight to voicemail. Marcus tried the Maine Coast Guard station. The automated system told him all operators were busy and to call back during regular business hours unless it was a genuine emergency. Was it an emergency? A woman's voice calling from the fog-wet ink appearing in a logbook. It sounded insane even to him. Instead, he opened his laptop and searched for Sarah Kellerman, Portland, Maine. The results made his blood turn cold. Portland Press-Herald, August 23, 1973. Local woman missing after boat found adrift. The Coast Guard continues searching for Sarah Kellerman, 23, after her small fishing boat was discovered empty and undamaged 3 miles southeast of Portland Headlight. Kellerman, an experienced sailor and Portland native, was last seen departing Spring Point Marina at approximately 2:30 p.m. yesterday, despite an unexpected fog warning issued by the National Weather Service. Marcus scrolled through dozens of follow-up articles. The search continued for 2 weeks before being officially called off. Sarah Kellerman's body was never found. Her boat showed no signs of damage or struggle. She had simply vanished into the fog 47 years ago. The same time frame Robert Hawthorne had mentioned in his crossed-out logbook entry. Marcus dug deeper into the Lighthouse records, accessing digital archives through his Coast Guard credentials. What he found made his hands shake as he typed. Every lighthouse keeper at Portland Head since 1973 had reported the same phenomenon during heavy fog, voices calling from Devil's Point, always a young woman's voice, always pleading for help. Most dismissed it as wind and imagination. A few, like Hawthorne, had written detailed accounts before being relieved of duty for psychological instability. The pattern was consistent. A new keeper would arrive, work normally for months or years, then begin reporting strange voices during foggy nights. Their behavior would become erratic, their logbook entries increasingly bizarre, until the Coast Guard removed them for their own safety. The position would remain vacant for several months before a new keeper was hired and the cycle began again. Marcus found psychiatric evaluations for 3 previous keepers. All described the same symptoms: auditory hallucinations, persistent belief that someone was in distress near the lighthouse, obsessive behavior regarding fog warnings and safety protocols. All mentioned a woman named Sarah, but the psychiatric reports contained something that made Marcus's chest tighten with fear. Each evaluation noted that the keepers could provide specific, verifiable details about Sarah Kellerman's disappearance. Details that had never been made public, information that existed only in sealed Coast Guard investigation files. Details no civilian should have known. A sound from outside interrupted his research. Not the foghorn, something else. A rhythmic tapping against the window, like fingernails against glass. Marcus looked up to see fog pressed against the panes once again, though his weather instruments showed clear conditions and calm seas. The tapping came again, more insistent now. Through the fog-dimmed glass, he could make out a pale shape moving in the gray void. It looked like someone standing just beyond the window trying to get his attention. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The fog surrounded him instantly, thick and impossible. But this time he was prepared. He'd left a rope tied to the door handle, uncoiling it as he moved to ensure he could find his way back. The shape he'd seen from inside was nowhere to be found, but the tapping sound continued, leading him away from the keeper's quarters toward the lighthouse tower. The sound led him to the tower's base, where an iron maintenance door provided access to the lamp room. The door stood slightly ajar, though Marcus was certain he'd locked it after his evening inspection. The tapping came from inside the tower, echoing up through the spiral staircase. Against every instinct, screaming at him to return to the safety of the quarters, Marcus pushed open the door and began climbing. The stairs were metal, installed during a 1960s renovation, but his footsteps echoed strangely, as if the tower were much larger than its actual dimensions. The lighthouse had 72 steps from base to lamp room. He'd climbed them hundreds of times. But tonight, he climbed far longer, his legs burning with exertion before finally reaching the gallery. The lamp room looked wrong. The massive Fresnel lens, normally a masterpiece of 19th century engineering, appeared dull and clouded, its carefully arranged prisms dark, despite the electric bulbs that should have illuminated them. The lighthouse beam that should have been rotating steadily had stopped, pointing fixedly toward Devil's Point. And standing beside the lens, translucent as morning mist, was a young woman in a yellow rain slicker. She turned toward Marcus with eyes that held the depth of ocean trenches. Her hair hung in wet strands around a face that was beautiful and terrible, preserved in the moment of death. When she spoke, her voice carried the sound of waves breaking over rocks. "You can see me now," she said, and smiled with lips blue from cold and drowning. They always can after a while. The fog makes it easier. Marcus tried to speak, tried to move, but found himself frozen as completely as if ice had formed in his veins. The woman stepped closer, her feet leaving puddles of seawater on the lamp room floor. 47 years? She continued, her voice mixing with the sound of wind through rigging and the distant cry of gulls. 47 years of calling for help, and they always hear me eventually. But they can never save me. Can you understand that I've been drowning for 47 years in the fog? The fog won't let me die properly. She gestured toward the darkened lens. The light went out that night. A storm damaged the generators, and Keeper Morrison was drunk again. I saw my boat drifting toward the rocks, and I called for help, but there was no light to guide the rescue boats. They found my vessel, but they never found me. I slipped beneath the waves in the dark, and I've been drowning ever since." Marcus found his voice at last. "What do you want?" "I want to stop drowning," Sarah whispered, and her form began to fade like fog in sunlight. "I want the light to work properly. I want someone to remember that a woman died because the lighthouse failed. But mostly," her voice became barely audible, mixing with the sound of distant waves, "I want someone to stay. All the others leave when they finally understand. But if you stay, if you keep the light burning properly, maybe I can finally rest." The fog began to clear from the lamp room, and with it, Sarah's form dissolved completely. But her final words lingered in the salt air. "The choice is yours, Marcus. But choose soon. The fog is coming back tomorrow night, and it's bringing others with it." Marcus stumbled down the lighthouse stairs, his mind reeling from the impossible encounter. Back in the keeper's quarters, he found the logbook open to a new page filled with entries in his handwriting that he had no memory of creating. March 15th, 2020, day 847, 2:30 a.m. Fog cleared. Sarah appeared in lamp room. She explained everything. The lighthouse failed the night she died. Keeper Morrison was intoxicated, failed to maintain backup generators during storm. Investigation covered up to protect Coast Guard reputation. 2:45 a.m. Researched Morrison's service record. 3 formal reprimands for drinking on duty. Retired quietly 2 months after Sarah's disappearance. 15 a.m. Found hidden compartment in desk. Previous keeper's notes describe encounters with multiple spirits. Sarah is not alone. Marcus's hands trembled as he read words he had never written. He checked the desk drawer, though he had no memory of searching it. Inside, pushed far to the back, was a manila envelope containing handwritten notes from previous lighthouse keepers. The papers were yellowed with age, some dating back decades. Keeper Williams, 1987. The woman in yellow appears during heavy fog. She warns about the others, victims of shipwrecks caused by lighthouse failures. They're all here, all of them trapped by their violent deaths in these waters. Keeper Rodriguez, 1995. Found lighthouse maintenance logs from 1970s. Pattern of mechanical failures always coinciding with severe weather. Someone was deliberately sabotaging the equipment. Sarah Kellerman was just the first victim. Keeper Hawthorne, 2017. The truth is in the foundation stones. Old Keeper Morrison wasn't just drunk. He was being paid to ensure the light failed during specific storms. Ships carrying valuable cargo were being deliberately wrecked for salvage operations. A new sound interrupted Marcus's reading. The deep resonant blast of the foghorn, but wrong, somehow too long and mournful, like the cry of some enormous dying animal. He looked outside to see fog rolling in again, but this time it wasn't the natural gray of ocean mist. This fog glowed with an inner phosphorescence, green and sickly, like the light of deep-sea creatures. The lighthouse beam flickered and went out completely. Marcus ran outside, but the fog was already upon him, thick as syrup and cold as Arctic water. In the unnatural luminescence, he could see shapes moving through the mist, human figures walking slowly toward the lighthouse. As they drew closer, he realized they weren't walking on the ground. They moved through the fog itself, feet dangling inches above the rocky shore. Sarah appeared first, her yellow rain slicker bright against the gray-green fog. Behind her came others, a man in a navy peacoat, his skull crushed on one side. A woman clutching an infant, both blue-white with hypothermia. A teenage boy whose life jacket hung in tatters around his broken ribs. Dozens of them, all victims of shipwrecks around Portland Head Light, all advancing through the supernatural fog with eyes that held the terrible patience of the long dead. "You've seen the truth now," Sarah called, her voice carrying clearly through the thick air. "You know what really happened here. The question is, what will you do about it?" The spirits surrounded Marcus in a circle, their drowned and broken forms clearly visible in the fog's eerie glow. He could hear water dripping from their clothes, could smell the rotting seaweed and salt of their oceanic graves. When they spoke, their voices merged into a chorus of the damned. "The light must never fail again. Remember us. Make them pay for what they did. Join us, Keeper. Help us keep the light burning." Sarah stepped closer, and Marcus could see that her eyes were black as deep water filled with tiny phosphorescent lights like bioluminescent plankton. When she reached out to touch his face, her fingers felt like ice-cold seawater. "You can choose," she whispered. "You can be like the others. Run away. Abandon your post, let the Coast Guard declare you mentally unfit. Or you can stay. Help us ensure that no more ships are lost to greed and corruption. Help us keep the light burning properly forever." "What happens if I stay?" Marcus managed to ask. Sarah smiled, and her teeth were like pearls in the darkness. "You become one of us eventually, but not yet. Not for years, maybe decades. You'll age normally, live a full life here, but you'll never be alone. We'll help you maintain the lighthouse better than any human keeper ever has. No ship will be lost on our watch, and when your time comes, when you finally join us in the fog, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you saved countless lives." The other spirits nodded in unison, their hollow eyes fixed on Marcus with desperate hope. "But if you leave," Sarah continued, "the next keeper will go through this same choice, and the next, and the next, until eventually someone chooses wrong, or the lighthouse is finally automated completely. And then..." Her form flickered, becoming momentarily solid, and Marcus could see the terrible wounds where the rocks had torn her body. "Then we'll be free to do more than just appear in the fog. We'll be free to take our revenge on the living." The fog began to press closer around Marcus, and he felt the cold touch of dead hands on his shoulders, his arms, his face. The spirits were waiting for his answer, their hollow eyes boring into his soul. Marcus closed his eyes and made his choice. "I'll stay," he whispered. The moment the words left his lips, the supernatural fog began to dissipate. The spirits faded back into mist, but not before Sarah touched his forehead with fingers that left a mark like frostbite. He felt something change inside his mind, a connection forming, knowledge flowing into him like water filling an empty vessel. He understood now. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigation aid. It was a guardian, a sentinel keeping watch over one of the most treacherous stretches of coast in North America. For 2 centuries, ships had foundered on these rocks, their crews joining the growing number of restless dead. But when the light burned properly, when a keeper truly understood his duty, the spirits found peace in their role as protectors rather than victims. As dawn broke over Casco Bay, Marcus returned to the keeper's quarters. The logbook lay open to March 15th, and new entries appeared in his handwriting as he watched 6:30 a.m. Fog cleared at sunrise. Made contact with the Guardians. Accepted responsibility for maintaining proper lighthouse operations. Sarah and the others will assist in ensuring no vessels are lost. 7:15 a.m. Discovered hidden maintenance schedules in desk. Previous keeper Morrison had deliberately delayed critical repairs. Will implement proper protocols immediately. 8 a.m. Called Coast Guard to report discovery of historical documents regarding 1970s lighthouse failures. Deputy Chief Morrison, grandson of former keeper, very interested in evidence. Marcus smiled grimly as he read the entries he had no memory of writing. The cold mark on his forehead throbbed, and he understood that his mind now served 2 purposes: his own consciousness and something larger. Something that had been watching over these waters far longer than any human institution. Over the following days, Marcus's reports to the Coast Guard led to a formal investigation into historical lighthouse failures. Maritime archaeology teams discovered evidence of deliberate sabotage dating back decades. Several prominent Portland families with shipping interests were implicated in a conspiracy to cause wrecks for insurance fraud and cargo salvage. The story made national news. Maritime safety regulations were strengthened. Families of historical shipwreck victims finally received acknowledgement of what had really happened to their loved ones. And every night as the lighthouse beam swept across Casco Bay, Marcus felt the presence of his ethereal guardians. Sarah appeared most often standing beside him during his evening watches, her form growing more solid and natural-looking as time passed. She no longer seemed like a drowned corpse, but like a dedicated fellow keeper who happened to be translucent. The fog still came, but now it brought protection rather than terror. Ships navigating through thick weather found themselves guided by an uncannily effective lighthouse beam that seemed to anticipate their needs, warnings that reached their radios with perfect timing and a strange sense of safety that experienced mariners couldn't quite explain. Marcus aged normally, but he was never lonely. He had the best lighthouse crew in the world. 5 years passed. Marcus Chen had become something of a local legend. The lighthouse keeper who'd uncovered the greatest maritime scandal in Maine's history, the man who'd transformed Portland Head Light from a routine navigation aid into the safest passage on the eastern seaboard. Not a single vessel had been lost in the surrounding waters since he'd taken over from the Spirit's guidance. Coast Guard officials praised his innovative safety protocols. Marine insurance companies sent inspectors to study his methods. Maritime colleges invited him to lecture on lighthouse operations. What none of them knew was that his most effective techniques came from consultations with a crew of helpful ghosts. On March 15, 2025, exactly 5 years after his first encounter with Sarah, Marcus sat at his desk, completing the evening's logbook entry. Outside, a natural fog was rolling in the ordinary kind that posed no supernatural threat. His ghostly assistants would help guide any vessels safely through as they had countless times before. As he wrote, Marcus noticed his handwriting looked different, shakier, older. When had that happened? He looked in the mirror above the desk and was shocked to see gray threading through his hair, deep lines around his eyes. Had 5 years really aged him so much? A sound from outside drew his attention. Not Sarah's voice. Something else. Someone calling for help from the direction of Devil's Point. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and headed outside, following protocols that had become second nature. But as he approached the rocky outcropping, he saw something that made his blood freeze in his veins. A young man was kneeling beside the tidal pools, frantically working over an unmoving form. Marcus could see a woman's body lying motionless on the wet rocks, her yellow rain slicker torn and bloody. "Help!" the young man called out. "Please." She fell from her boat in the fog. "I think she's..." He looked up at Marcus with eyes full of terror. "I think she's dead." Marcus ran toward them, but with each step the scene grew stranger. The man's clothes were oddly old-fashioned, a thick wool sweater and canvas pants that belonged to another era. The woman's rain slicker, though torn and bloodied, looked new despite her body showing signs of having been in the water for hours. As Marcus reached them, the young man looked up with desperate eyes and said, "You have to help her. Her name is Sarah Kellerman." The world tilted around Marcus. This was impossible. Sarah had died in 1973, but here she was, broken and dying on the rocks, just as she had been 52 years ago. And the young man trying to save her. Marcus looked closer and felt his heart stop. He was looking at himself. Not as he was now, grayed and lined with 5 years of lighthouse keeping, but as he had been when he'd first arrived at Portland Head Light, younger, softer, still carrying the pallor of too many years spent indoors. "You have to help her," his younger self repeated, but his voice was fading, becoming distant and hollow. As Marcus watched, both figures began to grow translucent, fading like fog in sunlight. With mounting horror, Marcus understood. He ran back to the lighthouse, his footsteps echoing strangely on stairs that seemed to extend far longer than they should. In the lamp room, he found Sarah waiting for him, no longer translucent, but solid and real, her yellow rain slicker clean and bright. "Now you understand," she said gently. "Time works differently here. You've been one of us since the night you chose to stay." The living Marcus Chen aged and died 3 years ago. The Coast Guard held a lovely memorial service. Marcus looked at his hand and watched them fade in and out of visibility like morning mist. In the distance, carried on impossible winds, he could hear the sound of a foghorn that he himself was somehow sounding, and the voice of a new lighthouse keeper calling out into the gray void. "Hello? Is someone out there? Sarah? Sarah? Where are you?" The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. And Marcus Chen joined the eternal watch, helping to keep the light burning in the endless fog.